It's 5 minutes past 7 p.m. Welcome to Black Hot Fire News at 7. This is Dimore. We start with a very sad update where a Kenyan long distance runner and marathon world record holder Kevin Kiptum lost his life in a greasy car accident last night. The 24-year-old marathon runner was the only person in history at the time of his death to have run a marathon in under 2 hours, 1 minute in a record-eligible race. Kevin Kiptum was born on the 2nd of December 1999 and grew up in Chepsamo village in Elgeyo Marakwet. He won 3 marathons he participated in, including 2 top-tier world marathon majors. The times he achieved in each of these races are 3 of the fastest 6 in history. He broke the 2 hours, 2 minutes in each case, making him the only man to ever break this barrier. He ran the fastest ever marathon debut in I'll come again. He ran the fastest ever marathon debut in Valencia marathon, becoming only the third man to break 2 hours and 2 minutes and setting the then fourth quickest time ever. He followed it up 4 months later with the second fastest marathon in history at 2 hours, 1 minute and 25 seconds, 16 seconds outside the world record. In his next race, the 2023 Chicago Marathon 6 months later, that was in October 2023, the 23-year-old broke the world record with a time of 2 hours and 35 seconds. He was married to a center Rotich and had 2 kids. His coach, Jevanis Hazikima, also died in the greasy accident that happened between Kaptagat and Eldoret. Police reports indicate that Kiptum was the driver of the Toyota Premio, which lost control and rolled off the road, killing the 2 and injuring a female passengers. Our condolences go to the family of Kiptum from the Black Hot Fire Network family, and I'll share a video of his life.
Been talking about him for weeks. People have been looking at him for weeks. He's got 2 sub 202 marathons, and he looks like he might even go below 201. And
Kelvin Kiptum is into the final 400 meters onto the carpet inside the City of Arts and Sciences. What a run it's been for him. You can see the Finnish country in front of him. What a run, Richard. It's going to be a new course record. Remember the course record set here 2 years ago by compatriot Evans Chibet.
Okay, where he tells himself, come on. He's doing all of the self-talk he needs to. And guess what? 800 meters, we just saw that. He can do this, Ed.
800 meters to go.
He still has to go a little bit uphill. Is that a factor in this case? You know how that right toward the finish, Mount Roosevelt, they call it, he's got to go on a little bit of an incline.
He's got the strength. He can dig down. It's a little different muscle fibers, but I think he can attack that. He's going to power the best way that he can. And I like his arm carriage. I like his knee lift. He's looking good. The back kick is looking good. He's looking like a track runner here. He's run 58 minutes for the half marathon. He can just finish things up here.
What a run, Richard. Absolutely staggering. I think he can hardly believe it himself. Only Kipchoge's world record in Berlin 2 months ago is faster, and Kiptum, by far the biggest victory in his career.
Will he break the world record?
It's going to be close. Eliud Kipchoge has been the GOAT for the last 10 years. This man is...
He's going to do it. It's 2 hours 14 right now.
He's digging down for this. He's worked so hard. Eliud Kipchoge has been the GOAT for the last 10 years. But this is the new young gun, Kelvin Kiptum. Finishing, we're going to get ourselves a new world record. He recognizes it. He's waving to the crowd.
This is not a normal video. In December of 2022, the world witnessed one of the most impossible feats in running history. A 23-year-old making his marathon debut against many of the world's best. And somehow, he came away with the victory. And he also became the 3rd fastest athlete to ever run the marathon, breaking 2 hours and 2 minutes for his marathon debut. Seeing this up-and-coming athlete was truly extraordinary. He ran with so much power. He ran with so much speed. It was like watching effortless poetry in motion as he glided across the streets of Valencia, Spain, all while drifting away from his competition with ease. Looking back at this race, it was but an introduction to the future, because even though 2022 was quite the powerful first impression, 2023 was truly a season to remember. For this 2023 campaign, Kelvin Kiptum from Kenya only ran 2 times. However, he set the world on fire against the best marathon runners in the world. In London, the stage was set. He was returning as the fastest in the field. He was now up against an even deeper field than Valencia, and against all odds, he repeated an unmatched level of excellence, setting the course record in 2 hours, 1 minute, and 25 seconds. And somehow, against all odds, Kelvin Kiptum struck again in his very next race. At the Chicago Marathon in 2023, Kiptum took down a record that many thought simply could not be broken, as he broke Eliud Kipchoge's world record with a time of 2 hours and 35 seconds, a nearly unheard of time that showcased just how talented this once-in-a-generation runner truly was. There are no words that can truly express the loss that this brings to the running community. And for this video, I want to stay away from any discussions about being the greatest ever in the marathon. This loss, quite frankly, goes far beyond just running and performance. And in a very real sense, Kiptum's legacy will forever be cemented in a way that will never be challenged. At 24 years of age, Kelvin Kiptum's passing is obviously a huge tragedy that has struck the hearts of every athletics fan in the world. But being so young, so talented, and so promising for the future, how does the sport even move on? To say that Kiptum's future was bright would be a significant understatement. More so than any other athlete that I have ever witnessed, Kiptum really was just getting started. Most people had him as the favorite moving into the Paris Olympics. Many saw him as the single athlete that could potentially break 2 hours under legal circumstances on a record-eligible course. Through 2023 and the early stages of 2024, Kiptum was highly regarded as the best marathon runner in the world. He really was next to invincible, possessing a running arsenal that quite frankly could not be matched. In reviewing Kiptum's running and his legacy, there is one thing that always seems to surface that truly separates him from his peers, and that is dedication. To find success in this sport, you have to sacrifice a lot. There's socializing, family, holidays, even your own mental health. And while many do this to an extreme, Kiptum's endless and quite frankly relentless dedication to his craft takes focus and investment in yourself to a completely new level. For this video, I think it's important to see Kiptum as a prime example of how training, focus, motivation, and sacrifice can in fact get you to the very top of your sport. So let's take a moment to review Kiptum's career and remember just how much this young legend achieved. Now, before Kiptum became a household name, he spent many years dreaming of running greatness. From very humble beginnings in Kenya, Kiptum's very early days of running were certainly far from world class. However, in the fall of 2018, an 18-year-old Kiptum saw his very first success, winning the Eldoret Half Marathon in 1 hour, 2 minutes, and 1 second. This race was a big deal. In fact, this is the very first race that is currently listed on his World Athletics profile. So this moment is really the race that started it all. And from this moment on, every single year saw crazy improvements. In both the half marathon and the marathon distance, Kiptum's progression can only be categorized as absolutely historic. In 2019, he broke 1 hour for the half marathon for the very first time, and following that in 2020, he actually broke 59 minutes for the half marathon. And this performance of 58 minutes and 42 seconds actually comes from one of the greatest all-around half marathons that the world has ever seen, as the world record was actually set in this very race by fellow Kenyan athlete B.H.F.N. But the young Kiptum wasn't too far behind, finishing 6th in this race in what many have regarded as the greatest half marathon of all time. It's so interesting to look back on this race because we actually covered this race in pretty great detail, but we never even touched on Kelvin Kiptum. However, in hindsight, it is so crazy to see one of the greatest marathon athletes ever running about 1 minute behind the finisher, and given what he did here, his future was obviously very bright. Moving into the 2020s, Kiptum's profile only continued to blossom, with more consistency on the big stages, and he ultimately attained more records coming with each performance. And even though these running moments were certainly tremendous, It's what was going on behind the scenes that really changed things for Kelvin Kiptum, because his training was beginning to reach historic levels, more so than almost any athlete that I have ever witnessed in the running circuit. After breaking the world record in 2023, Kiptum's training log became public for the world to see, even against the likes of Kipchoge and any other marathoner in Kenya, Uganda, or Ethiopia. Kiptum's mileage and dedication to the marathon were simply off the charts. Here's one prime example of what a typical training week looked like for Kelvin Kiptum during the heaviest weeks building into a marathon. If you haven't figured it out already just by looking at the first few days, this is pretty crazy training. From his speed work to his long runs to his relentless pacing, Kiptum really wasn't afraid to test the absolute limits of his athletic abilities. And even though his coach counseled patience and slightly lower mileage, Kiptum went for it anyways, throwing caution to the wind, and he ultimately reaped the benefits of such intense workouts. Now, I'm not suggesting that you all need to go out and run 200 miles every week. Most of us, in fact, are not built like Kelvin Kiptum. But it really is a testament to this man's strength and ultimate will to see how much running he could do behind the scenes. In many separate interviews, Kiptum discussed how his training cycle consists of pretty much just three things: running, eating, and sleeping. It sounds somewhat boring, to be honest, but to the best in the world, this is what you have to do. Invest full time in recovery, invest full time in running, and have a proper diet to help balance everything out. Even with a wife and 2 kids, Kiptum was gone for 6 days out of the week, and even on Sundays when he did visit his family, he only saw them for a few hours. This is really what Kelvin Kiptum was all about: complete dedication to his craft and a non-stop belief in himself. Watching Kelvin Kiptum continue to break records was already wild, and it certainly set a standard that nobody else in history has ever been able to match. But seeing how exactly he did this was even more of a shock. In every marathon that Kelvin Kiptum ever ran, he negative split every race, meaning that he ran the second half of his marathons even faster than his first halves. To this day, Kiptum is still the only person to ever split a second half marathon in a marathon under 1 hour, a pace that nobody, not even Eliud Kipchoge, has been able to attain. Now, the most memorable part of Kiptum's running is certainly his new world record, because this is the only time that someone has been able to take down the record of the great Kipchoge. This has placed him in a very, very rare position to be considered as the favorite against Kipchoge moving into the Olympic Games, and by all accounts, he certainly was set to do this. Runners that have been running over the past decade have all looked up to Eliud Kipchoge. He has certainly done some amazing things for the sport, but runners that will be running 5 to 10 years from now very well could have looked up to Kelvin Kiptum. He just was that guy, setting impossible times and inspiring a new generation. In a sport that demands your efforts and full-time commitment to yourself, Kiptum might have been the unbeatable superstar that everyone dreams of becoming. He's already achieved 3 historic feats in his first 3 marathons, and now we very well could be looking at the single biggest what if in sporting history. They're behind the scenes that really changed things for Kelvin Kiptum, because his training was beginning to reach historic levels, more so than almost any athlete that I have ever witnessed in the running circuit. After breaking the world record in 2023, Kiptum's training log became public for the world to see, even against the likes of Kipchoge and any other marathoner in Kenya, Uganda, or Ethiopia. Kiptum's mileage and dedication to the marathon were simply off the charts. Here's one prime example of what a typical training week looked like for Kelvin Kiptum during the heaviest weeks building into a marathon. If you haven't figured it out already just by looking at the first few days, this is pretty crazy training. From his speed work to his long runs to his relentless pacing, Kiptum really wasn't afraid to test the absolute limits of his athletic abilities. And even though his coach counseled patience and slightly lower mileage, Kiptum went for it anyways, throwing caution to the wind, and he ultimately reaped the benefits of such intense workouts. Now, I'm not suggesting that you all need to go out and run 200 miles every week. Most of us, in fact, are not built like Kelvin Kiptum. But it really is a testament to this man's strength and ultimate will to see how much running he could do behind the scenes. In many separate interviews, Kiptum discussed how his training cycle consists of pretty much just 3 things: running, eating, and sleeping. It sounds somewhat boring, to be honest, but to the best in the world, this is what you have to do. Invest full-time in recovery, invest full-time in running, and have a proper diet to help balance everything out. Even with a wife and 2 kids, Kiptum was gone for 6 days out of the week, and even on Sundays when he did visit his family, he only saw them for a few hours. This is really what Kelvin Kiptum was all about: complete dedication to his craft and a non-stop belief in himself. Watching Kelvin Kiptum continue to break records was already wild, and it certainly set a standard that nobody else in history has ever been able to match. But seeing how exactly he did this was even more of a shock. In every marathon that Kelvin Kiptum ever ran, he negative split every race, meaning that he ran the second half of his marathons even faster than his first halves. To this day, Kiptum is still the only Now, the most memorable part of Kiptum's running is certainly his new world record, because this is the only time that someone has been able to take down the record of the great Kipchoge. This has placed him in a very, very rare position to be considered as the favorite against Kipchoge moving into the Olympic Games, and by all accounts, he certainly was set to do this. Runners that have been running over the past decade have all looked up to Eliud Kipchoge. He has certainly done some amazing things for the sport, but runners that will be running 5 to 10 years from now very well could have looked up to Kelvin Kiptum. He just was that guy, setting impossible times and inspiring a new generation. In a sport that demands your efforts and full-time commitment to yourself, Kiptum might have been the unbeatable superstar that everyone dreams of becoming. He's already achieved 3 historic feats in his first 3 marathons, and now we very well could be looking at the single biggest what if in sporting history. There are so many things that I could say about Kelvin Kiptum, and I could sit here for many, many hours talking about his achievements. I do mean that quite literally. But for now, it's important to reflect upon the impact that he has had on the running community, because overwhelmingly, Kiptum's spirit brought a positive influence to the masses. He taught us that breaking 2 is undeniably possible. He taught us that focus can lead to greater things. He taught us that running the second half faster is the right way to go in a marathon. He taught us about breaking down possibilities, and he also taught us how at any point, anyone can achieve greatness. Thank you, Kelvin Kiptum, for inspiring a generation. Rest in peace, brother. We will never forget you.
And that was Kevin Kiptum's story. He was one of the greatest Kenyan athletes to ever live. And in another sad development, police in Limuru, Kiambu are searching for a suspect who stabbed a teacher to death at her home in Kamiridhu. The 51-year-old was a teacher at Ndeya Primary School and is said to have been at home when she was attacked at around 9 p.m. on Sunday. Neighbors found her in critical condition, and attempts to rush her to the hospital were unsuccessful as she succumbed to the injuries. This comes at a time when Kenya has been battling a lot of femicide cases, with many women being killed in mysterious circumstances. And in other news, Nigeria is also mourning as a helicopter crash on Sunday claims the life of 6 people, including Herbert Wigwe, the CEO of Access Bank, one of the biggest banks in Nigeria. The renowned CEO and his wife and son were among the 6 people on board when the aircraft went down shortly after 10 p.m. near Interstate 15. All 6 people on board were killed, including 2 pilots and the former chair of NGX Group, the Nigerian Stock Exchange. His name is Bomofin Amibola. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has grieved their death on his X account, and he writes, "Their passage is an overwhelming tragedy that is shocking beyond comprehension," he wrote. The 57-year-old CEO will be remembered for expanding Access Bank outside Nigeria to other countries in Africa. Investigators are already mapping the site with drones and collecting forensic data, and a preliminary report is expected in 30 days. Moving on. Ivory Coast are crowned the football champions of Africa after beating Nigeria in the AFCON finals, which were held yesterday. Nigeria took the lead with William Trust Ekong scoring in the 38th minute, but Sebastian Haller scored the winner after Frank Kessie equalized on the 62nd minute. This will be Ivory Coast's 3rd title after wins in 1992 and 2015, both of the wins which were in penalties. Nigeria had gone into the finals as the favorites to win the tournament, but Ivory Coast, which had been considered underdogs, shocked many by beating Nigeria's rock-solid defense and conceding 2 goals in a single game. Moving on to other news in Africa. Election protests have turned deadly in Senegal with at least 2 people confirmed dead. Security forces have clashed with hundreds of protesters who are opposed to the delay of presidential election that was supposed to take place on the 25th of February. Police in Dakar fired tear gas on crowds and prevented them from gathering and meeting to protest. Less than 3 weeks to the election, Parliament voted to push the elections back to December 15th, upholding President Sall's earlier postponement announcement and sealing an extension of his mandate. Cries of Macky Sall is a dictator were heard all over Dakar, with protesters waving Senegalese flags. And lastly, Ghana is celebrating the return of a few stolen artifacts by a United States museum. The looted Asante Royal Regalia and other objects are returning to their original place, that is the Manihila Palace, after 150 years, a sharp reminder of the colonial era appropriations. The repatriation is expected to open up a global dialogue on cultural heritage, with hopes that other countries will follow suit and reclaim their artifacts.
So 2 British museums are returning over 30 gold and silver artifacts that were stolen by UK colonizers in the 19th century during a colonial battle between the UK and Asante Kingdom, which is now called Ghana. And so, as I said, they're returning them, but they're only returning them on loan. Listen to what one of the V&A representatives from the museum has to say. Take a look.
We have a responsibility to the country's origins to think about how we can share those more fairly today. And it doesn't seem to me that all of our museums will fall down if we build up these kind of partnerships and exchanges.
Have you felt ashamed that these items are here?
I don't feel ashamed they're here. I feel they're part of a history of British-Ghanaian interaction, some of which is around war, some of which is around slavery, some of which is an incredible creative Ghanaian diaspora in the UK today.
So this was an agreement that was made with the current Asante king. His name is Otumfuo Osei Tutu II. And this is a long-term, well, what they call a long-term loan, which is for a minimum of 3 years. This king, King Otumfuo, attended King Charles' coronation, which I don't know why, perhaps trying to play nice in the sandbox so that we can get our artifacts back. But nevertheless, he did attend, and the gold that they are returning on loan is going to be displayed in the Manya Palace Museum, which is located in Kumasi. We need to make this make sense for me. These artifacts were stolen by UK colonizers, and they were then bought by the UK museums during an auction. So now they feel like they own it, and they are now telling the Ghanaian people, you can have it on loan, but you have to give it back. So if I went and robbed a jewelry store or an art gallery, and I stole some items during a looting, let's just do apples to apples. I don't have the right to then say, well, since I stole it and somebody purchased it in my circle, you can only borrow it for a couple of years, but then you have to return it to me. No, the Ghanaian people need to really lean in on this one and say, this is rightfully ours. So you don't have an opportunity or any right to it. I don't care if you bought it. It's not yours, and it wasn't yours to begin with. It was stolen from our people, like them folks continue to do in the continent of Africa trying to colonize and take over and take what's not theirs. So they need to not give it back to them, and we need to negotiate keeping it in that museum in Kumasi because it belongs to our people. Right now, it's only going to be there, as I said, for a period of 3 years, and mainly for the King's Silver Jubilee ceremony. They want to have, these artifacts on display. But again, it needs to stay there with our people where it belongs. So these UK museums are very nervous. Apparently, there's even laws that's banning them from permanently giving it back to us. Could you imagine this? Something that belongs to the Ghanaian people, to Ghana, and they're saying there's a law in the UK that bans them from permanently giving it back to us. No, we can't accept this, family. We need to do whatever we need to do to make sure it stays in Ghana. Let me know what you all think about this. Don't forget.
So that is what has been happening in Ghana with the return of a few artifacts that had been previously stolen. But the problem is they are being returned on loan rather than them being given back completely to the Ghanaian people where they belong.
With the Kenya Revenue.
Moving on to another developing story. You will no longer be able to file nil returns if you have money in the bank. This is in a new move by KRA, which will require banks to share customers' financial information with it. This will also apply to other financial institutions such as banks and trusts. Further, banks will be required to surrender the account balance or value, including cash value, or surrender value for cash value insurance or annuities, respectively. They will also be expected to present the amount paid or credited together with the total amount of interest and total amount of gross proceeds from other financial assets. The Bankers Association says all information will be transmitted electronically using technology approved by the KRA Commissioner.
Commercial banks have started implementing the Common Reporting Standard, CRS, a tax procedure regulation of 2023, which requires all Kenyan banks, trusts, and other financial institutions to report and share information about foreign account holders with the Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA, as the taxman steps up efforts to nab tax evaders and beneficiaries of illicit wealth. An announcement that has left customers jittery over their exposure. According to the Kenya Bankers Association, in correspondence to queries raised by Citizen TV, the taxman has requested data that includes account stakeholders' address, jurisdiction, residence, tax identification number, such as personal identification number or functional equivalent, as well as date and place of birth. Further, banks will also be expected to surrender the account balance or equivalent, including cash value or surrender value for cash value insurance contracts or annuity, respectively. They will also be expected to present the amount paid or credited to the account for each calendar year, together with the total gross amount of interest, the total gross amount of dividend, the total gross amount of other income generated concerning assets held in account, the total gross proceeds from the sale of redemption of financial assets in that year or other reporting period concerning which the financial institution acted as a custodian, a broker, nominee, or otherwise as an agent of the account holder for custodial accounts. The Bankers Association says all information will be submitted electronically using technology approved or provided by the Commissioner, KRA, and in the format required by the taxman to ensure security of data being shared as required by the regulation, noting, and I quote, sharing of customer data under CRS framework is in accordance with the provision of Data Protection Act, Section 25, that provides for principle and obligations of personal data protection, as well as Section 48 that provides for conditions to transfer of personal data outside Kenya. The bankers' umbrella body now says that the regulation will also require them to update details of pre-existing accounts to ensure compliance with the regulations, noting that it could also lead to an increase in the cost of compliance by banks and other RFIs.
So that was what has been happening in the business industry, in the business world. So you will not be able to file nil returns. Now, if you have money in your bank account, the banks will be required to share the details of all the money you have in the bank and all the transactions that you've had with the Kenya Revenue Authority. And I'll finish with a developing story that I've just received. And it says, war clashes and tensions have increased in Rwanda, with clashes between M23 rebels and government forces escalating. Elements of Rwandan army supporting the M23 in eastern Congo are reported to have launched surface-to-air missiles on Monday, according to AFP. Attached to the report were aerial images of a 6-wheel armored vehicle with a radar and a missile launcher system on the roof. The escalating fights in Congo have pushed thousands of civilians to flee the town of Sake. This is a developing story that I'll report more in-depthly tomorrow. And a big shout out to everybody who's been with me throughout the news. That was Jibajaba, Katie, and everybody else. And Jibajaba was asking, will you be hosting news as a daily segment? I'll be hosting news as a daily segment every day from 7 to 7:30 p.m. That is for 30 minutes every day. So that is all we had today on Black Hot Fire News at 7. You're now up to date on what has been happening in Africa. Coming up next is Joby with her show. Stay tuned.